Happy Leap Day, and welcome to WBC Faster Together, the LinkedIn Live series of Women Business Collaborative. I'm Gwen Young and thrilled to be joined today by Myla and Kalyn Romaine as we celebrate the end of Black History Month and the debut of Women's History Month, which starts tomorrow. For those of you that don't know, WBC is the unprecedented alliance of over 80 women business organizations and hundreds of business leaders building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. We live our commitment to DEI, and members of our leadership, our staff, board of directors, and our WBC champions include more than 34% people of color. And every one of our action initiatives had DEI goals for 2025 and 2030. So please check the chat for the 4 action initiatives through which we aim to accelerate change, and join our movement at wbcollaborative.org. So each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change and accelerate impact by presenting data, research, and best practices, by lifting up the power of women's voices for change, and by showcasing leaders committed to allyship, inclusivity, and driving purpose across the business landscape. So as we close out Black History Month, it's more important than ever that we continue to build critical conversations about increasing the number of women of color in leadership at all levels, from the senior-most level to middle management to the workforce. Achieving equity for women of color in leadership roles requires a commitment to breaking down a long-standing systemic barriers, as well as a recognition of how the lived experience of women of color play an important role in building the culture and moving businesses forward. So I'm delighted to be joined by Myla Skinner, the CEO of Committee of 200 and a pivotal WBC partner, and Kalyn Romaine, who is an organizational psychologist and founder of Dream Forward Consulting. Kalyn and Myla, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad
Hi.
to be here. Hi.
Thrilled to have you guys here. So let's start with the sort of personal story and experiences. What has your career journey looked like? And maybe let's talk about that key moment in your growth as a leader. Myla, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to. So, my story is by no stretch of the imagination a linear one. I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Oftentimes people say there's Black people in Colorado. There's a lot of us in Colorado, actually. But then, to find some balance, I moved to Atlanta after I graduated high school. Actually, my mother said you cannot apply to college in Colorado. You need to go and see what the world has to offer. I want you to experience that. So lived in Atlanta for 5 years, went to college for 1 year, then dropped out. Atlanta was a fun place at that time, late 90s, and I was having a lot of fun. And then that fun led to the pregnancy, my pregnancy with my son, who is an amazing young man. But then I moved to Chicago, and I realized early in my moving to Chicago, I did not have a college degree. I really had no relevant work experience to speak of, and I was now responsible for the life of another human being. So I, found a job at a little auto shop on the south side of Chicago, took myself back to school where I went to school at night to raise my toddler son, and graduated, and then found my first, what I would call, career job at a small nonprofit in Chicago, at that time called the CARA program, now called the CARA Collective, and grew up there. And I would say, the most pivotal moment for me was when I was on my way to leaving that organization, and I got a call from my next employer, which would be my next employer, the University of Chicago. And they said, hey, we want you to come work here. We're willing to pay you, almost double what you make now. And I said, no. And I said no because I was afraid. I was afraid to go out and take that next step and to survive outside of this kind of world that I had been in. And I got a call from my boss at that time. And at first she said, oh, thank you for not taking the job. We're so happy you're staying. And then she called me back and she said, Myla, I'm not Catholic, but I think I'm experiencing Catholic guilt. And she said, you gotta go. You take this job, it will change the trajectory of your life. And it did. And I will say that is the most pivotal moment in my career It was another woman of color speaking to me as a Black woman saying, go on this journey, grow into what we know you can become. And that was really the place in which I grew more at the University of Chicago. I went on to take other opportunities that ultimately led me to a place where I'm a confident CEO now. But it were it not for that moment that a woman of color reached out to me as a younger professional, recognizing the complexities of the life that I lived, and said, run towards it. I can confidently say I would not be here today.
Wow. Wow. Kalyn?
Wow, I'm listening to that. Let me also say, so to the listeners, Myla and I are new to each other, but
Yeah,
the similarities in our story in terms of geographic location and even organization is crazy
I love
because
it.
I'm a native Detroiter. I live in Atlanta now, but I've had about 7 stops along the way. One of which, and the longest of which, was in Chicago,
All
working
right.
in workforce development on WIA grants at the
Ah,
King Center on the south side of Chicago.
come on.
So Carol was one of our partners. I also spent time working in government for the city of Chicago, and Kara was one of our partners because I managed the apprenticeship program for formerly incarcerated individuals, and Kara was one of the organizations we partnered with. So this is like crazy to me. Whenever
I
I say these words, people
love it.
never know it. So Myla, oh my good, yes, we have to stay in touch, sis.
Yes.
Like that's just an aside. But I think, similar to Myla, my career path was not linear at all. I accidentally fell into the work that I do. I graduated from undergrad with very little direction, which was a complete foil to the way I had lived my childhood experiences. I was this hyper focused, you know, highly accomplished kid, went to these amazing magnet schools in Detroit. Shout out to Bates Academy and Renaissance High School. And so I was going to be the next, you know, um, high powered attorney. I was going to be Barbara Jordan, Star Jones, like those types of people, and got to college and crashed because of some personal things that happened in my life. A trigger warning for people. I was sexually assaulted going into my senior year of high school. And instead of facing that head on, I suppressed it and pushed it down. And of course, when you get to a space, anybody who's ever had to deal with complex trauma, when you can clear space, it's like it all weighs down on you. And so I just kind of crashed when I got to college. And my response was to jump headfirst into religious, basically like cults. I mean, this was like crazy story. So by the time I graduated from undergrad, I was completely off track. And I was like, I want to go save the world, which meant that I tried everything from being a bank teller to an elementary school teacher to then working in social services. And at that point, I realized, girl, you need to make some money. And I am a University of Michigan grad. So, of course, all of my peers are working at, the Boston consulting groups of the world and Sprint engineers and all this. And I'm like, and like, what you do? I said, oh, I work in this place where they give out SNAP benefits and they help people find jobs. They were like, what? You crazy girl. That is not what we graduated to do. And I knew then that there was a purpose for me taking this wrong turn. And that purpose was to teach me to be deeply empathetic to other people's life stories, which has made me a better organizational psychologist. And so I ended up navigating my way back to these amazing corporate experiences. I worked in leadership at Amazon and the Walt Disney Company, and again, the City of New York and Chicago Transit Authority, and all these amazing places, Zapier. But that start working with the community during the Great Recession, helping other people find their path, is what informs how I show up in my work now as an organizational psychologist. So when we talk about building inclusive pipelines, not just for Black women, but across the spectrum of diversity, I've seen that firsthand. I've seen what it looks like for someone with a PhD to come in and say, I'm willing literally to sweep the street so that my kids can have a meal tonight, right?
Mhm.
I've seen the people who are high powered CEOs and billionaires, and they just want to figure out how to get the share price up. That
Mhm.
whole spectrum of experiences, I've lived it, I've worked with it, I've advised it. And so the way I show up as a leader is to really show up as a servant because
Mhm.
I understand the complexity of the human experience and I'm able to speak to that for people who may not have had those same touch points.
It's beautiful.
Important for the workforce, important for the communities in which they work, customers, and so forth. And let's sort of go to that place. So, Myla, as you're leading Committee of 200, which is committed to elevating women into leadership roles from like the C-suite to the CEO,
Mm-hmm.
to supporting women entrepreneurs and building their business. As you work with these leaders across industry and functions, what are the opportunities? What are the successes and challenges you are seeing for women of color, today? And I know we're talking about yours, so let's kind of keep bringing this theme forward. What
Yeah.
successes and challenges are you seeing?
Absolutely, Gwen. I appreciate the question. It's twofold. One is, I would say, the same challenges, and I love this, Kalyn, because we both come from understanding workforce development. The same challenges that people of color, in particular Black people, face at entry level positions are same things that we're seeing in particular for entrepreneurs at senior levels. It's access to networks, it's access to capital. It is people deeply understanding that these women have a vision for their work and them being able to manifest that vision through dollars, through resources, some of the things that many, I think people in particular, non-people of color take for granted, which is that network. And that network ties to the second piece for me, which is what C200 is really about, is sisterhood, right? It's about the connection between women that deeply understand the experiences of one another. And when you are growing up, in particular, as a Black woman, a woman of color, you don't have that network. You don't have that sisterhood. And you also don't have it. And what we have found in particular with our members is even our white women executives and entrepreneurs don't have that network. And so I think it's a challenge that exists across the board. I think it is far more acute for Black women, but it is one that exists for all women. And so, how do we create these environments that feel welcoming? There's this ugly narrative attached to women that they can't get along, that they're nasty to one another, that they cut each other down. That's not the experience, even if went in sharing my own personal journey. That's not the experience that I've seen. That's not my lived experience. And so, how do we create this environment where we're consistently lifting each other up and providing supports? There are things that I have available that Kalyn might not have available. And so, if we're able to come together, how do I leverage the resources that I have and the connections that I have? Kalyn leverage hers, and we can be collective in our building.
I love that. Kalyn, I want to kind of bring you in too, because you've worked with a
Yes.
variety of organizations and leaders on this, right? And you talked about building the pipeline. So let's go a little bit deeper on this. And how can we
Yeah.
ensure that these strategies are helping us build that pipeline and bring in those experiences?
Yes, absolutely. It's so interesting because as Myla was giving her answer, I have had very different experiences on a couple of points. So, first, I want to be clear what Myla is saying is completely correct, and I'll add in another perspective. So, it's almost like the other side of perhaps a
Mm-hmm.
lens. For me, I have always had a passion for strategy in my work. And when we talk about inclusive pipelines, org design has to be a part of that conversation. So when you think about organization design, most of the time you are not given access to be a strategist until you're either a senior manager or above, or you have courted the favor of the people who are senior managers and above. And so that's where I find a lot of Black women flounder because I've lived it where my skill set is not a fit for the lower rungs of the leveling system. And if I don't have the right person backing me, I quite literally can't show my gifts and talents. And I'm going to look like I'm less productive or look like I'm less accomplished because I'm actually doing my supervisor's work in secret. Like almost every job I've had, I was the person almost like puppeting my supervisor from the background and not being credited for that work until I got to senior manager level, which was over 10 years into my career. And so when we think about those types of statistics, it's not unique. When we talk to a lot of Black women in focus groups, executive coaching, we're asking questions. I mean, they are feeding answers, strategies to the CEO and getting a fraction of the pay. I've had jobs where I have written reports for boards of directors. I've seen Black women who have created multi-million dollar products and no one even knows that they've done it. So when we talk about systems, think about all of the functional areas of HR which can create roadblocks and
Mm-hmm.
glass ceilings for Black women. What does your compensation systems look like? What does that look like in terms of the job descriptions? Are they appropriately written and monitored for the
Mm-hmm.
contributions that people actually make? What does your recognition system look like? Is it the same people who keep getting promotions? Like, you're good, but come on, fam, you're not that good. So you mean to tell me you're the only person that gets a promotion? Right. Let's look at development systems. Who gets access to one-on-one executive coaching? Who gets access to boutique training programs and experiences? Who gets to go on retreats to learn more? Who gets to be a part of sponsorship programs that produce real results?
Mm-hmm.
Who gets to benefit from high touch retention efforts, the hand holding, the begging to stay, the tossing out of dollars to make sure that they stay put in advance of someone putting in their resignation? Who gets the benefit of a respectful separation? So when I think about the people who quit, who just gets pushed out the door versus who gets the gold star and the big party to say thank you for your accomplishments and the reference letters and the LinkedIn recommendations, right? Like, all of these things, if you think about the employee life cycle, they feed into the pipeline. And the main issue I bring up of where the problem compounds for Black women is that it's never usually just on one job. It happened at this job, then I fought and clawed my way to the next job and got like one level up, and then it happened there. But I kept fighting and clawing, and now I'm at the next job, and then I had to take a step back, and then I took a step, but it keeps happening. And over time, that compounding of being underserved, underappreciated, underpaid, underrecognized, underpromoted, that leads to what we're seeing now, which is the mass exodus of Black women from corporate America and from jobs now to entrepreneurship, where they face similar challenges. So again, this is a systemic issue around every touch point of what it looks like to be a professional. And this is across all industries too.
So that leads kind of perfectly into, my next question. So, Women Business Collaborative, we have, the 80 organizations you've heard, the 300 champions, right? And we're trying to change systems and policies. So in June, we're working and going to release a report on women of color in leadership,
Love that.
right? And so I'd love to hear from both of you. How can our collaborative, how can this kind of alliance, right? There's the point about Myla you brought up about women generally needing to be in networks. And so what can we do to help advance? Because we're really here, Kalyn, I'm going to start with you, trying to change these organizations and systems. What's the power? What can this collaborative do? And how can we do this together?
Absolutely. What I'll start with, and I have been trying to get someone to sponsor this research, Black women's contributions to the economy are miscalculated and undercounted. So I'll use myself as an example. My company is 8 years old. I have only been a full time entrepreneur for about a year and a half. Most of the time I've had my company, I have worked a full-time job and been a full-time grad student. I'm finishing my PhD now, but I have completed a whole master's degree, all of the coursework for my PhD while holding down full-time jobs, including leadership and executive roles, and scaled multiple companies at the same time. The contribution that makes to the economy is massive, and I'm not the only one. When you talk about the economic contributions of Black women putting tax dollars back through their W-2 income and putting money into the economy through their 1099s, putting their ideas and intellectual property into the world through doing their job because they have to pay their bills, and through building innovative companies, is completely understated. And I have yet to see any research that appropriately addresses those contributions. I actually want to contribute to this. I'm going to talk to you offline, Gwen, because even the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of Labor, I don't even see them counting it appropriately. And I think that if we don't address the power of the dual worker, we will never appropriately have the right policy interventions and programmatic interventions for Black women. Because I don't know any Black woman who only does one thing. And I mean that sincerely. Every Black woman I have ever met and worked with did at least 2 to 3 things, had like 2 to 3 jobs, went to school and worked, managed a family, was a caretaker for this person, and did this other thing. We were never able to be singular workers. And that phenomenon has to be studied to really understand how to appropriately support Black women.
Kalyn, you're a gift. So thank you. You are a gift, and you have just highlighted the narrative of so many women that I know. Like it's deeply emotional to me because they are people I care deeply about. So thank you for that. And no, I've never had just one job. And uh, I have the I mean, great privilege of working with our members who are some of the most achieved and accomplished business women, both entrepreneur and corporate executives in the world, as the CEO of C200. And and we'll just speak very transparently. I mean, it's not a surprise. The majority of those women are not women of color. And it makes sense, right? Because we know, even just at a visceral level, that the higher you get, the less likely it is that you are a woman. The higher you get, the even more less likely it is that you are a woman of color. And so it makes sense that our membership does not represent a significant amount of women of color. That's not to say we don't have some of the baddest women of color as members of C200, and they know who they are, and they know I love them deeply. Um, I will say, though, there is an opportunity for women in particular, and I will continue to go back to this, is to elevate each other. In particular, elevate women of color, elevate Black women, right? Be that, recognize that. Like, I think we think about power and privilege as a pie, right? If I give up my slice, that means there's not enough pie for you. I'm giving pie to somebody else. It's not that, right? We have chosen to limit that. That's what power has forced us to do. So for me, it is recognizing that there's enough here for all of us. And my responsibility is to lift up that Black woman that Kalyn just talked about, who wrote the paper, that pushed the product, that stayed here late last night alongside me, and to say, no, it wasn't just me, it was Kalyn that was with me too, right? And in particular, for our women who are leaders, who are not women of color, is to shine the light on Black women and to say, come on with me to this event. Let me be both your mentor, your sponsor. And I don't mean this in a paternalistic way, but let me be a partner to you, because I've had the benefit of some of these successes and people who sponsored me and looked out for me and represented me when I wasn't in the room. And I want to make sure I'm doing the same for you. And so I think that is just such a significant opportunity that we can continue to lean into, because again, there's room for all of us. We just got to fight for it, and we got to be part of the conversations.
I love that. Can I hop in real quick, Gwen? Because I want to pull out a few words that Myla said. She talked about power, privilege. She talked about systems. One of the things that I always try to do, especially in trainings, is level set and create shared language, shared meaning, because certain words have been so diluted, they have been um, put in all types of ways that dilute the potency of what they really mean. And I think that one of the things that I like about this organization is that it creates shared language and understanding. And I think if we continue to push that forward, what does
Yes.
it mean to have power? What does it mean to have privilege, to have
Yes.
influence? What does capital mean? What does
Yes.
sponsorship mean? Helping people to get that then helps people to define what they can contribute.
Yes.
It's that allyship and that inclusive language,
Yes.
not an exclusive, not a
Yes.
this is
Yes.
over here. And it's understanding, to your point, to Kalyn, to bring in what you were talking about before, sort of understanding the experiences, but weaving it together into that
Yes.
common and shared narrative. And unfortunately, we have gone over our time.
Oh,
And this is all we're gonna have. You guys, I feel like this should have been
oh my God, I have so much
Yeah.
more.
we gotta have you back. We gotta build this out. We gotta have part 2 of this.
Oh my
conversation.
God.
I saw you, Myla, and I'm like, and I was that way as well. So I'm at the Asian American Business Roundtable this morning, and we were just talking about being in the room together.
Yeah.
ERGs and BRGs, being open to, whether people choose to or not, being in the room together, that allyship, that inclusive language. And somebody said, maybe we need a new language for all of this, that everybody can hear and understand, that isn't threatening to position, pay, and power for other people, that brings us all into that position, pay, and power
Yes, because
conversation.
we've got to stop. We've got to stop. We are subject to this divisive system, and
Yes.
we need, as women, we are the force that can break that down.
Yeah.
But if we're not getting in the conversation, if we're not in the fight, it's just going to get worse.
Yeah.
Again,
So
I can
this
go on for years.
conversation- Exactly. You can go on for- Well, I was going to say, this conversation, Committee of 200, Women Business Collaborative is a collaborative, you two having the next conversation, us having
Yes.
this conversation publicly, that's what we're going to do. So we invite the whole audience to wbcollaborative.org to learn more about how WBC and leaders like Myla and Kalyn are aiming to increase women in C-suite in the boardroom, to address the underrepresentation of women in all industries, and even access to capital, women as investors, right? And to advance this pipeline of women leaders that are going to bring gender and pay equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion to the business landscape. So join us weekly to keep up to date on our progress, the movement for gender equity in business, and the latest issues by following us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, at WB Collaborative. Have a great